Okay, so we've had the structure of the report. We've had insights from David in terms of his reflections on that, and we've now had some provocations from Mike in terms of how we move forward. So can I invite those members of the panel who haven't had a chance to speak yet, just to give a few of their views in relation to the report, or any reflections you might have from your own organisations, and then I'll throw it open to questions from everybody, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to
Thank you.
kick off. I guess, I thought the report was very good. Really outlined how we got to where we are today, the current challenges, and what the reward function needs to do for the future. I guess at Strategic Dimensions, we work very much in the now. People talk to us when their reward director has left or has been fired, or they're looking to hire someone to do this work for the first time. And I think my reflection is that all of the briefs we get really focus on the immediate problems, the now, which I guess alludes to Mike's stuck in the mud situation slightly. Everyone wants to know that their reward director is going to be very safe in the RemCo conversations. They want immediate solutions to talent attraction and retention. And there's far less focus on the more longer term contribution around the green agenda, around developing reward programs that will attract the next generation of people coming through. Where that comes out is in the interviews. CEOs, private equity partners are really inquisitive about this stuff, and they want and expect the reward people they meet to have ideas and solutions around next generation, around the green agenda and those bigger picture problems. But it's not showing up a whole lot in the immediate briefs we're seeing. I think something else that comes up, particularly from CPOs who still continue to be very reward light and very, very concerned that their reward director is going to be absolutely sound and secure in this space, is engagement with the broader HR function. I think it might be Martin who raised the question about sharing complex ideas. I think that's really key. When we're often replacing reward directors, one of the key things CPOs want to change is to hire someone who can engage better with the broader HR function and the business and unscramble some of the complex and help the organisation understand it. So I think those are some of the things that I would say are in the report there around the future focus of rewards and have sort of come out in various conversations.
Thank you. Ben?
I'll go next. Hi everyone, I'm Ben Pelanigan from Bupa. I'm the reward director there. I think one of the reflections for me that's changed in the last couple of years is I found, certainly it might be me, might be the role, might be the organisation, there's far more focus on the link between our top executive incentives and the strategy. We've had far more focus on that, far more conversations around what the right measures, how do we get into that space. And so I've been spending lots more of my time with the folks outside of the finance team. So the finance team, or a team you have to work with obviously, but it's getting into what are the other non-financial metrics and drivers of the business, what are the proof points of delivering your strategy, what might be a lead indicator or a lag indicator. So it's really interesting, but also it's quite challenging because I often find I'm the I would call it the voice of reason. Many people would say I'm the person that might say no, but something would be a great strategic idea, but you can't measure it. What does that drive? How do you prove you get there? So that we're getting into lots of that space, and it's got to the stage where we're now. So in Bupa's context, we have a 3-year strategy that we launched last year. That will run till the end of next year. We have an LTIP that we will launch again next year. But you're in this weird position around your LTIP will cover 1 year of your current strategy and 2 years of a strategy you're yet to announce. So you're sort of in the space of trying to understand what is coming out around the new strategy, what would you hook onto, how do you keep it relevant, how do you make sure you're not setting a measure that will, in 3 years' time, no longer be something that's important to the business, but you've set a measure that actually was important 4 years ago, let's say. So I'm finding that really interesting. I don't have an answer to that. It's lots of conversations with lots of people trying to understand how it's working. But I've certainly seen more focus on that, about having incentives and having drivers of performance that are linked to actual strategy and what people can influence and something meaningful that they can understand and deliver.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. Julie?
Brilliant. So, hi everyone, I'm Julie Withnell from ABF. So I think interesting thoughts from me from what we've heard today. I think the zone of uncomfortable debate is a brilliant term, and I think is also a really important space for us to be operating in. I think that's asking the difficult questions. So to your point about, performance measures, what does that mean? What are the risks? What will be the unintended consequences? I think that's especially important for us as we move to ESG metrics. So most businesses and most finance teams have very long histories with understanding what people will do to game their profit targets. We have very little experience of what are the unintended consequences and the things that can go wrong with these ESG targets, apart from potentially just setting them either at crazy levels that you've got no idea how to get to, or at levels where everybody's getting a max payout and investors just get really fed up with you. But we've had lots of debates around things like, if you ask the business to do X, so in our case, one of the things we talk about is the Primark Cotton Programme, or if you go and ask them to put extra farmers onto it, are you getting the farmers who actually can implement the learnings and can make a difference in the way that they're growing their cotton crops? Or are you getting extra people for the sake of ticking a box and having extra people? And obviously what you want is the extra people who are in the space where they can implement it and go forward with it in a productive way for them, for the environment, and for the people in the supply chain. So I think those kind of questions and thinking and really being in that debate zone of what's going to make a difference to the business and how do we understand that is really important. I think for me there's something really interesting as well around the AI piece and that really struck me about the statistics about how many of us think it's the future but how few of us are there now and really understand it. And I'm really interested in how do we make that transition and how do we not wait, sort of sit back and wait for everybody else to have come up with the solution before we follow everybody else down that same path. And I think part of that answer might be in Mike's points about mentors. So should we be going and looking for mentors who are more in that AI technology space, who can help us to understand how you transfer that into the reward space? For me, that feels like a big gap and a big challenge, and one that we probably need to challenge ourselves about how we address. So if anybody out there is way ahead on that game, please come and talk to me and tell me how I can find out more and how to get arms around it better. So they were my main thoughts.
Okay. Thank you. Mike, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is food for free in a sense. And I recall in my last corporate job, which was a long time ago, I never got much from a lot of the business schools or whatever, some better than others, obviously. But what proved to be incredibly useful was we used to swap stories with 3M, who at that time were doing incredibly well. And we used to have home and away days. So we would go and visit them, team of 3 or 4, and we would talk about reward or we'd talk about something else, whatever. And then they'd come and visit us and they'd play us. And the purpose of the exercise was to exchange. And, you give me one of yours and you can have... It's just that exchange of information. There's always somebody who knows more about something than you do. And I think you have to structure it and you have to find the organisation who is obviously non-compete. But I think in general terms, organisations do swap and do collaborate. And I think getting that kind of structured exchange in a way can be extremely useful. You get so much information. How does this work and whatever else? And so I don't know. I mean, I would have thought there'd be loads of organisations want to talk to you about what you're doing and vice versa.
That's a great idea.
David?
Not particularly. Just to pick up on that point, I think Google and Procter & Gamble have an exchange of talent. So there's high brand and marketing that goes in and tech that comes the other way. And it's a personal agenda. I think charities should do more of that. On the whole, they lose people out of the sector, and because charities are often quite small, they can't really create career paths for people. There is a sector there, and they're highly collaborative, and you'll find lots of consortiums of charities. I think they should do some sort of talent sharing model.
I would agree with that.
And then if it works there, it'll work elsewhere.
Exactly, yes. Okay, so we've had quite a few insights across these discussions. So the floor is now open to you. Mike didn't get any questions at the end of his, and having thrown down a challenge about the state of the function. So who would like to kick off with some questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Eva. It's an observation, really, and I'd appreciate the panel's view on whether it's indicative of their broader experience, or and whether it's a problem or not. But I see a lot fewer reward directors who have a background in HR. They tend to come from tax, legal, financial backgrounds, or work up an independent reward route. And I just wonder if people think that that's, well, A, am I right? Dan might know because he sees a lot of people for a lot of jobs. But is that a problem?
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, 100%. You tend to find, the talent people move around a fair bit. A lot of the CPOs have a background in talent and OD. Yeah, very few people stray into reward and stay. And even fewer get out, I think. But I think it is probably the most critical, oh God, dare I say, the most critical function in most organisations. If you look at all of these massive issues, we're dealing with. Boards are, incredibly keen to make sure their reward function is sound, to stay off the front pages and for all those sorts of reasons. And if you look at that massive issue around what the next generations are looking for, it's different. So I think addressing that is huge. So I think, for us as recruiters, and I think my colleagues in the room, Chris, Karen, Georgia, Alice would agree, the reward function never dips. It's always in demand. Recession, growth, Lehman's, COVID. If you're in reward, you're always all right. Chris will lament the fact that when we get an interim reward job, it's difficult because everyone's always in a job. So I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I think you're right. People stay in the function. It's a really good place to be. And I think the contribution it can be making to organisations is massive. And there was a lot in the report about the bravery needed to stand up and shout for some of these hugely critical issues. When it's really difficult, when business is tough and profits are hard to come by and share prices are flat, to really argue the case to do some of this stuff.
Mike, before you comment on that, Phil had his hand up wanting to make a comment.
A bit scared about being locked into a room and never been able to get out, but I just wanted to pick that up in the context. One of the things that I think is an albatross around our neck is what you've written there as topic expert. And I was always told that expert is made up of two component elements: X, the unknown quantity, and spurt, a drip under pressure. And so I think that to a certain extent, topic expert is a bit of an albatross. As an expert, you're expected to know more than anybody else about stuff. And I don't think that that is our role. I've always said that the best consultants, reward consultants that I've ever known, know all the right questions, and the worst ones tend to think that they know all the right answers. And basically, I think our role is around being quite clear about the things that we don't understand and wanting to make sure that we understand them better. So that was the one side of it. And the other side is, of course, the top point, which we had violent agreement on, and that is the lack of discussion that goes on about the business model and how we make our money, and how we make our money on a sustainable basis, and how we plan to make money on a sustainable basis for the future. And I think that we have a much greater role than possibly we may be exercising in terms of how we generate that debate out into the organisation, make sure that people in the wider organisation do understand and can articulate in the same way that we should be able to what the business model is, and how we link that into the reward models that we're putting out there. So those are my two reflections.
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, I mean, experts, by that I mean I think it is often useful to know what you're talking about. You know, we've seen very many examples where people get put in jobs and they don't, and it never ends well. And so experts, what I mean by that is you should know your stuff. And whether you know more about it than anybody else, I don't know. What I was intrigued by was Richard's question there about, you know, the reward function in that sense. And you'll know, and you might want to comment upon, your experience of Nick Holly's training program. Nick's a colleague of ours who runs programs for would-be HR directors. And I think it's fair to say, Phil, that a number of people there don't really get to understand what reward's about. I think a lot of people come up the HR community through talent and other bits, but there are a lot of people who make it to a fairly senior level without having touched reward, and they can't get much further. I think unless you understand reward, you're never, ever going to be a proper HR director. It's fundamental. Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's understanding the business and understanding reward in the context. You know that we talk about endlessly that we call it PARC because we're the performance and reward center. And in all masterclass and stuff we do, we talk about performance before reward. We talk about the business model before we talk about reward. And you know that from the beginning we could have called ourselves a center for reward and performance. And of course that spells crap. and if you talk about reward before we talk about performance, crap is what you get.
Very true. Yeah. And interestingly, one of the people that you had up there, David, Nigel Travis.
Yeah.
I've worked with Nigel, so's Phil and various other people. But Nigel used to draw up this box saying, right, if you are going to be a CHRO, if you absolutely have to have done talent, you have to have done selection, you have to have done reward, and various other functions. And he'd literally say, you have to go through all of those. And that was something that GrandMet did to, you know, with all of their HR people. And if not, you wouldn't have been considered for one of the more senior roles. And, you know, I did a stint as a director of reward, and when I was going into it first I thought, I'm really not going to like this, and I found it so interesting because it had to be within that business context. So
There are many people in the audience who don't know that as of 1997 GrandMet called itself,
well, probably not, looking at the audience. Yes, so GrandMet, where all three of us have talked about being before, is now Diageo. And one of the other things that GrandMet always did was it took risks on people. So you went into a job thinking, I really hope no one finds out I don't know what I'm doing at the moment. And they gave you the support that we've talked about, the training, the development, the mentoring, and put that around you within a risk framework because they didn't want you to fail. And I don't think organisations take enough risks with people now. To the detriment of that skills development that we've been saying, if you can't recruit it, you know, develop it internally, and you have to take risk when you do that.
Yeah. I'm very interested in this development element of not just the reward function, but the HR community in general terms. Just be interested in any examples people have got of success stories. You know, what do you do to develop people in the HR community other than experiential?
Okay.
I think it's where you see, one of the reasons why you see tax, etc. people in the reward world, you know, sort of in the more senior roles, is because they've grown up in consultancy, which has given them that, you know, all the soft skill set that was on David's list. And then they've also got the technical skills. You know, you can grow those and develop those probably more easily in-house. I think it's very challenging to grow up, certainly in the reward world, in-house, and then to make that step from that technical specialist to the broader skill set. And I don't think there's, you know, if you're an HR generalist, you get the business partnering training and all of those things. And I think it's very unusual to get the same level of that support and development in reward.
Ben, any reflections from you? What's your background in terms of how you...
So I spent first 8 years of my life in consulting and then went across. And I was just actually, as you were speaking, Jude, I was trying to think of the people that I know and what their path was. And for a lot of people, they went into reward quite early and then just stayed in it. I think it is quite hard to move across into reward later. I think there's a bit where early on it's easy, and then at the top end it's easy. But in the middle, where you're relying on having expert, as you call them, knowing your onions, and also people asking you what to do. Whereas at the top, you have a team of people that you can rely on to do that. Actually, when you're there, I can't think of many people that have comfortably come across from the HR field. A lot of them have come from a more technical area, either in either mobility or tax or something like that, because there is a heavy focus on numbers and analytics, and I think that scares people away. And it attracts a certain sort of person. I also think the certain sort of person isn't necessarily the person that can easily progress past that. It's almost like a crutch. It's you love your spreadsheets and you get into it, and actually there's a point in time actually that isn't the thing. That's not what it's about. But it's quite hard to see that as you're going through it. So certainly for the people that I have known and helped, it's coaching them away from that. Actually, that isn't that important in the grand scheme of things. It's the other softer skills. It's the stakeholder management. There was a word that I found a bit antagonistic earlier, which was political awareness. That sounds it's a very cynical way of looking at it. For me, it's about understanding people, what drives them and what's important to them, and how you navigate a path through. But that stuff, I think you can come in at the top more easily than you can come in mid-career.
And in response to your political awareness comment, I would say it's more political nous, which is understanding how to manage your stakeholders, influence them, having the understanding of what might be on their mind, what their concerns might be. Because I think most of us don't like politics with big P. But if you don't understand the political landscape with a smaller p, then it's really difficult to navigate the organisation and influence. So yeah, I get why you would react to political awareness in that sense. Okay, David, you see lots of
I'm not allowed to answer questions. I'm a consultant. So
Sorry?
I'm not allowed to answer questions.
No, you are allowed to answer a question if we put one to
I
you
was
directly.
14 when I had the epiphany and realised I wanted to be a reward leader. And ever since then, I've seen, I'm not sure what your question is, but I was reflecting on some of this. I think the consultant and in-house, I did it the other way for some reason. And have enjoyed it that way. But certainly, it seems like the consultancies are good at nurturing the talent, I think, and immersing them in lots of good and varied experiences, which makes them quite capable.
Yeah. Unlike you, I wanted to be a nun when I was 14, but didn't quite make it.
like me, yes.
No, you didn't.
Oh, thank you, Michael.
I was going to make. I walked in rudely to a presentation late the other day, and it was being delivered by the CIPD, a guy from the CIPD. I can't remember his name. At that point, he was presenting a report that they're about to bring out. I think it's about Future Skills 2030 or something within the HR community. And he put up a list of skills that HR professionals say that they think are most important or would most want to acquire. And what do you think was at the top? Oh, come on. So look out for that. I think when it comes, there is a piece of work that they've done that is reinforcing, I think.
The answer was?
Reward.
Reward.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, say it again.
Reward.
Phil's happy now.
Just add something to that point. So one of my regrets is a bit strong, but in my consulting career, I steered away from the very super technical accountancy actuarial type route. In some ways, I regret that, because trying to now be in a comfortable place of challenging the CFO, the FDs on very technical areas, it's a weak spot. And so in some ways, I've got more comfortable with asking what I would think is a stupid question, and actually it turns out it wasn't that stupid. It was just super technical when they can't easily explain it. But I think if you compare the reward function against lots of other HR functions, you do need an element of being comfortable with numbers, to the extent that I think if you didn't have a relationship with the finance, well, certainly where I am, it would be a bit of a nail in the coffin. You just wouldn't survive, because everyone looks to you to be the person that can take it and interpret it and analyse it. And if you couldn't do that, I think you would probably struggle. And it's maybe something, for a lot of people, not their natural, comfortable place.
But I think that's also true for CHROs. you do need to understand your way around numbers and the key questions to ask. And most CFOs, if you say, what are the 4 or 5 questions you ask yourself in your head when you look at this, they'll tell you. And they'll tell you very quickly, and you think, wow, that wasn't rocket science, that's really helpful. So, yeah. Sorry, Phil, you were pointing at someone. Sorry, we need a... Oh, you've got it. Good. Thank you.
So I really like the report. I think I said on LinkedIn I'm using the report. I am in a unique situation where I'm at Severn Trent in the Midlands, and we lost most of our reward team to some aggressive poaching from an unnamed car manufacturer, Jaguar Land Rover. And I've had to grow a reward team from scratch using internal moves. And what's great about this report is it's kind of articulating what I think I've been saying for a long time. It's not black and white. It's not all numbers. I think one of the things that came out for me is I feel like in reward we manage tension a lot. So at the moment I would articulate that as, what do you want to be known for? What do we stand for as an organisation? I think we see that a lot in the benefits space at the moment in terms of your list of well-being, resilience. It keeps growing and growing and growing, and I think with the cost of living crisis, it's almost understanding where that boundary lies between what the employer offers and where the employer steps in, and where actually we shouldn't go there. We're not best placed to go there. I think the other tension I'm feeling at the moment is with the rise of non-financial exec comp metrics. I feel like we're starting to stray into the space of paying executives for how they make their money, not only what they make their money doing. And I wonder whether already are we in a position where you can almost look ahead 5-10 years and go, the things that we're busily scratching our heads on how we build into LTIP design, are they going to become things that are underpins? And actually we shouldn't be paying for that, but we should be reducing if we don't do those things. So I think I loved the report. I think it's really good. And whether you have any reflections on any of that and the tension, because exactly what you said, Martin, it's not black and white. I'm firmly in the grey. I sit beside my generalist HRBP here, and throughout the report I've been going, see, told you. But any reflections on any of that?
A few. I probably won't get them out very coherently. So it's often grey. In some ways, that's really frustrating because there's no clean answer, but actually I find that quite fun because you get to have really, really good conversations. That bit you mentioned about non-financial metrics and the numbers is, and I should probably caveat what I said around the numbers. I don't think reward is a numbers thing, but actually and there's an element of personal bias coming through here, if I think of the best business leaders I have come across, and general managers, they know the numbers really well. It doesn't mean they're the FD, but they know their numbers. They know the P&L. They know what drives. They know their customer growth. They know those the core attributes of that business. And I take a lot from that, going, actually, you really know what drives it, but not in a financial way, just understanding their business. When I think about the non-financial metrics, I find that really interesting. It's a really interesting area to be in because we've yet to define it, and I think there could come a time where financial performance, in Bupa's context, financial performance actually might not be the driver. The non-financials might be the driver with the ROCE, I've mentioned ROCE. ROCE for us is a big financial metric. There are some financial metrics that might be the underpin. They might be, as long as you're making enough money and you're growing in the right way, how you do it is more important than making the money in the first place. So certainly something we're going to start talking about is flipping that around. Now we're sort of fortunate in that we're not listed, so we don't have, we follow a lot of the rules, but we don't have some of the same challenges if you were listed. So we can look at something like that and downplay those, whereas that might be much harder to do in a listed environment. But then picking the non-financial metrics, they're so flawed. The principle is absolutely brilliant. You want to drive something. As soon as you incentivize it, you ruin that measure. Everything suddenly becomes gamed. People are playing the numbers, or you look at the definition of a number and someone counts 5 and someone else counts 10, and it's like, is that right? Is that wrong? How do you navigate a way through? And then it gets sometimes really tricky to try and find a path through. So then you go, in spirit it was the right thing, in practice it's not, and that bit I find that a really interesting place to be, because you get right into the heart of some of the focus areas about what's driving our strategy.
David?
I'm going to do something really clever. I'm going to be smug about it. I'm going to weave Diageo into the conversation again. The inspirational nature of someone who was a finance director who then took on the lead reward role and pack it all up into something that was very purposeful. And that is because, I don't know if you know, Diageo was probably one of the first organisations that said we're going to offer on a global basis 26 weeks fully paid parental leave to either or both parent. And that was a guy called Ian Archbold, who's subsequently gone on to Haleon, which is the GSK spin-off, and he's done the same there. And I've done lots of work with organisations around these sorts of things, and I think inevitably what you get is almost two behaviours, one of which is, what's the return on the investment of us doing this? So someone has to go over here and produce a spreadsheet and work out what the cost is based on the percentage of people who are likely to have... And Ian's comment when he said he brought it to the board, they all agreed because it was just the right thing to do. And I think that's, when you've got that kind of purpose and there's something very clearly purposeful about what you're doing, I think sometimes all of that need for detailed analysis just disappears.
Just say a bit more about that. Why did it happen? Why did they do it? What were they trying to accomplish?
I think it was, I mean, there has been a big movement around parental leave, particularly because, you know, linked to DEI.
But this was all around the world for their business.
They felt it was the right thing to do it on a global basis. And it's, I mean, what we've seen is other organisations start to follow suit. And there is a piece of work, which I think KPMG did with them, that said, yeah, the returns are squillions on top of the cost of actually doing it. And you can make those numbers as you see fit. But this came from the values of the organisation. And he, you know, his view is that it's returned manyfold based on the fact that people now look at the organisation, men and women, you know, past their, you know, had their children or not thinking of having children, it didn't really matter. They looked in on this policy and said, I want to work for an organisation that treats people like that.
I think part of the issue there is that organisations tend to do things in clusters of one. And doing that is might be good, might not be good, but it depends what else is happening at the same time. It won't compensate for things that aren't being done. But I think if, you know, one of the other things about today's discussion is that organisations need to be much more holistic and systemic about what they're doing. So, you know, they need a cohesive approach across the board in terms of benefits extension through to their reward policies. It needs to be consistent. And just doing things in clusters of one is not going to do very much. Do you remember the conversation we had with Derek when he talked to us about BHP looking to introduce all employee share schemes? And he said, why are you doing that, Derek? He said, I've been asked to. And, yeah, it's I'm not saying it's good or bad to do that, but I do think there needs to be a coherent, cohesive approach to whatever is done in an organisation. It's all part, or it could be part of creating the right culture, if that's what it's for.
Just a very brief comment, just building on, you know, what Mike said about the CRF event and talking to people in small, rapid growth, perhaps private equity-backed organisations. Then you talked about, you know, Bupa being non-listed, really the challenges of being listed. I think that's a separator. You know, when we're working for these PE firms, they're starting from scratch. They can do what they want. They're building in their vision right now based on what's going on in the world right now. Whereas, you know, the challenges of working in a limited company, in a listed organisation, I think perhaps it's harder to maybe do that. But if you had the chance to start again from scratch, I wonder if a lot of these businesses would do things quite dramatically differently.
Okay, one more question and then I shall hand over to Karen.
Thank you, and thanks for the discussion, really insightful. I mean, just an observation or two really. One word I don't think I've heard today is the word agility. And actually, I think we sort of, you know, sort of implicitly discussed it, but not so explicitly. I was also going to mention the word courage, and I think, Dan, you mentioned the word bravery. Sometimes it can be a bit of a problematic word for people, sort of having that courage to do things. But I think, you know, I think we've all talked about, you know, the importance of having directors, heads of reward who know their subject, who are good with numbers. That goes without saying, but sort of I think, you know, David and I sort of we do work in you know, the skills space where we've developed our point of view on skills, haven't we, David, as a new currency of work. And I think it's almost like those technical skills are a given, but the softer skills are increasingly becoming more important. And actually, I just wonder sort of what the balance might become, sort of the technical versus those softer skills. Is it, you know, for myself, gosh, I could never imagine becoming a reward director and, you know, if I hadn't done the sort of starting as a reward analyst, because I'd be terrified I'd get found out. But actually, that may change. And I just wonder sort of what the panel think about that. Do you think it is going to change? Do you think actually the technical skills do need to be a given, but those softer skills are just going to increase more in importance and relevance?
I think what's going to be really interesting actually is if AI comes and takes out the middle, then what do you do about the top and the understanding of the knowledge you'd have got while you were in the middle? And how do you then go about being a great reward leader? But I think those softer skills are really, really critical. And to your point, courage, I think, is incredibly important to have those difficult conversations. I think somebody asked you the first question, Helen, earlier about, the sort of almost the reward leader being the person who's sort of in the middle and helping to navigate some of the difficult conversations between the RemCo and the executive. And I think, having the courage to help with that, especially where it's a new RemCo chair who maybe hasn't got those relationships yet, and there's some kind of really crunchy topic where, there's very different perspectives. Knowing how to facilitate that really tricky conversation and come out the other side of it with a great outcome is probably, I think, the hardest bit of the job.
Yeah, and I think it will continue to grow in importance, the softer skills. That does come through in the report, and it came through in areas David was talking about with his long list of skills that I nearly broke my neck reading, and also Mike's points. There's huge opportunities for reward directors, head of rewards, HR people and so on to become absolutely front and centre and the real advisor to the chairman, to the board, to the CEO, because everything that comes within these areas now, the determinants of business success fall within the remit of HR. In succession, culture, reward, recruitment, development, it's all within that area. And that's why so many more HR people are getting onto boards. Reward directors are attractive on boards because of RemCo issues, which are now becoming increasingly complex. But the defining piece, in my view, is those softer skills, because all of that has to be taken as read. But understanding the business, understanding how to influence and navigate, being strategic is absolutely, absolutely key. So, thank you. Thank you. So, Karen, I think at this point, it's over to you.
So, before we show our appreciation for our speakers and panellists, it would be amiss for me not to do a bit of a pitch for PARC. So, you're members of PARC, and when I look at that list, in terms of supporting you to make a contribution, giving you sources of knowledge, giving you sources of mentors, people outside of your area. We're very fortunate. We're an associate business with CRF and SD. We have external partners. We have research partners. So we do have access, for instance, to people with AI expertise. Through the member query service, you have the opportunity to collaborate with one another, find out unintentional consequences that fellow members have found by pursuing a course of action. So we will support you as much as we can, and if we don't know the answer to some of the questions, we often know someone that can help you. So now I would like us to show appreciation to everybody that has contributed from this side of the room. So if we could please show our appreciation, that would be great. A special thank you to Helen for chairing the event for us. Thank you very much. And I would also like to say thank you to our participants online who will not be joining us for drinks, but I would encourage you all to meet downstairs in the bar, carry on conversations, and we look forward to seeing you again at our next event. Thank you. Thanks very much.